All right, well, welcome to the introduction to the 2015 Green Communities Certification Program. This course is approved for 1 hour of continuing education units, GBCI, AIA-HSW, AIBD, Green Certified Professionals, and may be approved for your state-based design or contractor license. I'm your host and moderator. My name is Brett Little, and I'm the Executive Director here at the Green Home Institute. We are a nonprofit that's been around since 2000, and we exist to empower people to make healthier and more sustainable choices in the renovation and construction of the places we live. We have to thank our huge 2016 Platinum Plus sponsor for allowing us to be able to do these sessions, Anderson Windows. Check them out for all your fenestration needs, as well as our 2016 sponsors, Cake Systems, Panasonic, Certainteed, Air Renew System, and Warmboard. Do you support greener homes? You can become a member, continue to support this free CE education, get discounts on full in-person educations and trainings, reduce the costs of your certification fees for green building, and more. So I'm really excited to introduce to you today Krista Egger, Senior Program Director of the Green Communities Initiative at Enterprise Foundation. Krista manages the development and implementation of the National Green Training and Technical Assistance Program to support affordable housing development teams. Previously, she directed Advanced Energy's Affordable Housing Business Unit, which provides programmatic and building science expertise. She also led the award-winning Guaranteed Performance System Vision program and has done consulting services with Enterprise Green Communities, Habitat for Humanity International, Neighborhood Works, and several utility clients. So with that, Krista, I will hand it over to you, and feel free to take it away.
Great. Thanks so much, Brett. I'm really glad to be here and appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to talk about the Enterprise Green Communities program with everyone today. As Brett said, my name is Krista Egger. I'm Senior Program Director with Enterprise Community Partners, and I'm based in our DC office. I'm on Enterprise's National Green Team, and we work all around the country with affordable housing stakeholders to bring the benefits of green building to that community. And as Brett said, I manage, among other things, I manage the Enterprise Green Communities criteria and certification process, which we will be talking about right now. So I'm going to turn over to this agenda slide and just want to orient everyone about what we're going to be discussing today. So I'd like to have a conversation with you all about green affordable housing, specifically through our framework, the Enterprise Green Communities program. I'll start by sharing a bit of context about how Enterprise came to this space, and a bit of context about how the Enterprise Green Communities criteria were developed and where it's used. And then I'll take you through highlights of each of our 8 categories of our program, and then I'll close with an overview of the process of certification, and then we'll have time for questions at the end. So I'm going to start out by sharing a quote with you all from our founder, Jim Rouse, who you see pictured here. Mr. Rouse was a prolific real estate developer, and he retired in 1980, and instead of sitting around for the rest of his life, he turned right around and founded the Enterprise Foundation, which is now known as Enterprise Community Partners. And in short, we're a national nonprofit, and we focus on increasing the quantity and improving the quality of affordable housing all across the country. To date, we've invested nearly $18.6 billion, helped create nearly 340,000 homes, and touched millions of lives through this activity. And although we were called a foundation in the beginning of our organizational history, we weren't endowed financially, but we like to say that we were endowed intellectually by Mr. Rouse. And I put this quote up here to set some context about what we're talking about today. And so Mr. Rouse said, "We believe, because it is true, that people are affected by their environment, by space and scale, by color and texture, by nature and beauty, that they can be uplifted, made to feel important." And I just really like to start at this place to remind us that all of us who have a hand in creating homes for people are also directly impacting the quality of life of the people who are living there. So just really like to start out with that. So although Enterprise has been around for a little over 30 years, since 1980, our green initiative did not start until 2004. So around that time, in the early 2000s, we had started hearing from our partners, from stakeholders in the affordable housing community around the country, that they were really interested in building homes that were more efficient and durable and comfortable and safe and healthy, but they really didn't know how to go about doing that. At that time, LEED existed, but there wasn't a pathway for residential or for multifamily. And so our partners in the affordable housing space were looking for some guidelines. So we did one of the things that we do best, and we pulled together some of the best minds in the green building space and the multifamily development space around the country, and collaboratively developed the Enterprise Green Communities criteria. It's a holistic green building program, and we've been maintaining that ever since 2004. So our aim was to bring the benefits of green building to the affordable housing sector, to make sure that the people who are most vulnerable in our communities can benefit from the benefits of green building. So in the beginning, we actually gave copies of our criteria and grants of about $50,000 to developers of affordable housing, and said, try this out, see how it works, let us know what's working well, what's not working well, et cetera, so that we can continue to build resources to help other owners and builders of affordable housing achieve the benefits of green building. So we did that for several years. We'll now see, if you go to our website, that we have more than 400 resources, various white papers and toolkits and specifications, et cetera, that we have developed over the years to help fill these gaps. And while we no longer issue those grants along with our criteria anymore, we do have a certification process now. So in 2010, we established a third-party certification process so that you not only are just saying that, yes, we built our projects to the criteria, but we were actually certified by Enterprise that our project met all of those standards. So the criteria was launched in 2004, the certification platform in 2010, and today, if you'll see on this next slide, here we go, we have certified projects in 39 states and the District of Columbia. We have 80,000 units at some stage of our pipeline, and our relationships with the owners, the developers, and the green building consultants, and the trades, and the builders are really critical to us in all of these areas to ensure that we're delivering value to the marketplace. And of course, we hope that soon this whole map will be blue and we'll have states in every state of the country. One key component of our program is that we service both single family as well as multifamily. We do projects that are rural as well as urban. We do new construction as well as substantial rehab and moderate rehab. So all of these different building types are included in our program. The one defining factor and similar factor across all projects that are certified to green communities is that they must have units of affordable housing in the project. So that's our defining feature. As I said, we first launched our criteria in 2004, and we've updated it ever since. We release an update, a revised version of our criteria every 3 or 4 years. And last April, we released our most recent version, which is the 2015 Enterprise Green Communities criteria. The map that you see on the slide in front of you here represents the process that we went through in 2014 to develop this update. It was an intensely collaborative process. We worked with thousands of people across the country, going through a research section in the beginning, scanning industry trends, meeting with developers and owners of housing all around the country. We convened a technical working group with 10 experts in different aspects of green building. Then we had a policy working group, an advisory working group. And then in the fall of 2014, we had a robust draft of the 2015 criteria. We released it for public comment. We made revisions based off of that. And then the next phase that we went into is the criteria weightings exercise, where we worked with our technical working group, again, to determine how many points should be associated with each of our optional criterion based on a number of different factors. And then we went through the design and publication phase and released it last April. And as of this past October, if you're starting a new project in our program, you must follow the 2015 criteria. So we've gone through that transition phase, and any new project must follow the new criteria. Although if you started a project in an earlier version, you're still welcome to finish to that same version that you started. So what is the criteria? On the screen now, you'll see the listing of the 8 categories that are embedded in our program. It's an ambitious yet achievable framework. It's a holistic framework, collaboratively created. Like I said, we have mandatory and optional criteria in each of these 8 areas, and they also reflect slight differences based on construction type, as I said earlier, whether you're single family or multifamily, new construction or rehab. The 8 categories that we have here, you start at the top with integrative design. We found that the most telling factor of whether or not a project will be successful is the amount of time and attention they really put into the design phase to make sure that decisions are made and instructions are given to trades later on so that the building will be built well. Then we go into the location and neighborhood fabric section, which is really about selecting a good site. Then site improvements, which is improving that site that you selected. Then water conservation, which is really about water consumption inside the unit, since we address outdoor water consumption in the site section. After water, we go down to energy efficiency, then materials, then healthy living environment, which really includes everything from ventilation to smoke-free building practices. And then we wrap it up with operations, maintenance, and resident engagement. Although certification happens once the building is placed in service, we want to make sure that at that time the project is set up so that it will be maintained and operated, and residents will live in it in a knowledgeable way about how to maintain and achieve the green goals associated with the project that were outset at the design phase. And then, of course, ideally, what you learn about operating buildings in your portfolio will then feed into the design phase of your next project. So these are the 8 categories of our program. As I said, we have mandatory and optional criteria in each of these 8 categories. If you're a new construction project, you need to achieve at least 35 optional points. If you're an existing building, we have a slightly lower threshold of you need to achieve at least 30 points in addition to the mandatory criterion. And then this next slide is probably a little bit more applicable for people who are familiar with the older version of our criteria, the 2011 version, and who are really interested in knowing what are the biggest changes between the older version and this new 2015 version. So here are the top 3 changes that are reflected in our 2015 criteria. The first one has to do with that integrative design process I mentioned in the beginning that we know is so critical to ensuring project success. And what we've done in the 2015 criteria is inserted intention around evaluating how you can build your project in such a way that you will be improving the health characteristics of the people who will be living there, and how can you improve your project in such a way that it will be more resilient to weather hazards or natural disasters at the design phase. So if you look at this bullet point, it says the 2015 criteria requires that seekers of certification assess and address community health characteristics and relevant resilience measures during the integrative design process. If you look at our full criteria manual, you'll look at these measures, you'll see that we've identified and spelled out a very practical, straightforward pathway for groups to do this that doesn't require outside expertise. We've streamlined it in a pretty robust way for the mandatory items that are related to health and resilience in the integrative design process. We also have some optional measures related to health and resilience in the design process that do require that you work with an outside professional, for instance, a public health professional or someone who has deep expertise in resilience, if you'd like to pursue those optional pathways. But this is something new, and so I wanted to call this out. It's one of the biggest differences between our older and our current criteria. The second bullet point is about performance. So from the very beginning of our program, we've always required that projects share with Enterprise, share with us information about how much energy their projects are using. So all the house paid bills and at least 15% of the tenant paid bills if it's a multifamily project. And that information has been really useful to us in a number of different ways. We've been able to do different cost-benefit studies and really show what different parts of the program cost and save different amounts. But what we've realized at the same time is that us having all of this data doesn't really provide project owners and managers, it's not useful to them if they don't have it. So in the 2015 criteria, we're requiring that energy and water data will not simply be collected by enterprise, but will also be managed by each project owner in a manner that influences project operations. So this is new, and this is written in a fairly open way because we recognize that each project and team that's managing that project will have a different mechanism that makes most sense to them in terms of managing this energy and water data in a way that influences property operations. You could keep an Excel spreadsheet, for instance, of your energy and water data, or you could sign up in a benchmarking service. So whatever mechanism makes most sense for the project team is what we will accept. And then the third biggest change between the older version and the new version of the program is about location. So now, projects pursuing certification must explore best practices of transit-oriented development, offering means for residents to connect to community amenities in more meaningful ways than ever before. So this is most applicable to new construction projects, but I wanted to call it out because it is a bigger change in our program. So those are the three highlights of what's different between the older version and the new version. For those of you for whom this program is brand new, it gives you a little bit of a flavor about our content. So I'm going to move to the next slide here and just let you know that right now, as we're on the phone, or in the future, if you think you would like to learn more information about our program, this is our website. So at the top, it's enterprisecommunity.org/green. And then over on the side of the page, once you go there, if you click on criteria and certification, you'll see the pictures that are on this slide here. So you can click on the criteria picture to learn more about our criteria. The full manual is there that has a robust description of every requirement, along with recommendations and resources in order to more easily fulfill it. And then if you click on the certification portal side of things, you'll learn more about the process of certification. You'll also see FAQs that we've received about the process of certification and the criteria. You'll also see information about what documents are required to submit to back up that your project is in compliance. So this is where you go for more information. But if we move on, let's go back to the criteria and ground ourselves in these 8 categories. And while the 8 categories in and of themselves are very critical, it's actually the synergies between decisions that you're making about system choices for your project that relate between several of these different categories that is incredibly important. So our program, although we do have a checklist included in our manual that lists out all the categories and the criteria and the number of points, we did not design this to just be a checklist compliance exercise, right? We designed the criteria and the certification process to be a tool that provides you the opportunity to create a project that performs to your liking, and that will reflect a holistic approach to sustainability. You know, when you're working on a project, you know the constraints and the priorities of that project better than we ever will, and the realities of your implementation of that project. And so what we'd really like you to do is use our criteria as a tool to create a project with meaningful characteristics, right? So you might be most interested in pursuing aggressive levels of energy efficiency, or you might be more interested in health. The criteria is here to provide you pathways and guidelines about how to achieve those objectives in your project. So what we suggest groups do when they're first evaluating using our criteria is to review it in full and identify what items you may have already planned to incorporate in your project, right? What easy wins might you identify? And then go through and identify what stretch goals you might have, which criteria might be just outside of your reach, but with a little additional support or technical assistance you could incorporate. And then we want to make sure that you double check that you have all the mandatory items included in your project and that you're achieving at least that 35 or 30 points for the optional measures. But then what's really critical is to evaluate how the decisions that you're making in the name of one of these categories is really affecting the decisions that you're making in another. And to bring this home a little bit, I want to give an example of the Hancock Tower. So those of you, if you're in Boston, you might recognize this building. It's in the middle of Boston. It was commissioned by the Hancock Bank, and they wanted to design and build a building that really showcased their presence and power and their cutting-edge nature in terms of technology, and to really be a magnificent building in the heart of Boston. I.M. Pei and Partners were the architects, one of the most prominent architects at the time, and they were really putting all the resources that the team possibly could into determining how this building could really be on the cutting edge and be an excellent example of architecture and of being a commercial building. So that was the intent. Unfortunately, some of you may know, if you're familiar with this building, that's not exactly what happened, at least in the building. This building was designed, it was 60 stories tall. It still is 60 stories tall. And unfortunately, it could not open on schedule, because soon after it opened, you'll see what it looked like here. So what actually started happening was that the window panes of this building started popping out and falling to the ground. They actually had to block off several streets around the Hancock building in Boston, because these panes of glass were each 5 feet by 11 feet large. They were each 500 pounds, and they were just exploding off the facade and falling to the ground below. This was a disaster, right? A safety issue. And it was certainly not giving the impression of the Hancock building that the owners had intended. And so everyone started doing diagnostics and trying to determine, why was this building acting in this way? And they looked at all sorts of things. And what they finally realized was that the double pane windows that were chosen to be installed in this building in the name of energy efficiency had never been used in a building of this height before. And the pressures that the wind is providing upon this building at the heights where these windows were installed just could not take the stress. And the lead solder that was holding the two panes of glass together could not withstand those forces. And so the outer pane of glass would simply pop off and fall to the ground when certain temperature and pressure changes were in effect. So they ended up having to, they had chosen these double pane windows in the name of energy efficiency because they wanted a cutting edge, great building. But because they didn't consider how that component of the building that they had chosen for energy efficiency, how these windows were affecting the other components of the building, they had a project that had failure in its early days. What they ended up having to do was replace every single window in the building to a tune of about $5 to $7 million, and they actually replaced them with single pane windows. But the building no longer had them popping out. So the reason that I'm giving this story is to just really drive home the importance of this integrative design process, thinking about, if you're speccing a certain heating and cooling system, making sure that you're being careful about which efficiency ratings are on it, as well as, for instance, whether or not your operations and maintenance staff can actually order replacement parts, right? So this whole house is a system concept, and this whole integrative design concept is really, really critical. Making sure that you're thinking about the synergies between these different sections is really important. So with that preamble, I'm ready to go into the different 8 categories of our criteria, and we're going to give you just highlights of what we have there. But I want to pause for just a moment and see if anybody has any questions just about the context of certification and what we're trying to do here. Okay.
Yeah, this is I got a couple questions here, and if anyone else does, feel free to drop them in there in the chat. What are the, some of these programs have registration, certification fees, and costs. What are the costs for the Enterprise Green Communities program?
Yeah, great question. So Enterprise we do not charge a fee for our services in certification outside of New York City. in New York City, we have an arrangement with the city for a small per project fee, but anywhere else in the country, we actually don't have a charge. So groups coming through the program will certainly have to pay for their construction upgrades, right? And they will have to hire an energy rater or some kind of energy professional to work on the project, but we at Enterprise will not receive any funds. So we raise money from philanthropic sources to support our team's work.
And do you all certify mixed-use buildings with residential and commercial?
Yep, we do. We do mixed use and mixed income. As long as a portion of the building has affordable housing in it, we will consider it for the program.
And what about like scattered site projects that have some of their commercial buildings outside of the residential? Are people able to use that program for that?
If there was a building that was 100% commercial, we wouldn't consider that as part of the project. But if it's scattered site that has residential, like affordable residential scattered site, that would be fine. Mm-hmm.
So here's a question from Meredith. Is there a way for professionals to get in touch with project teams needing expertise, energy raters, modeling, et cetera?
Yeah, that's a great question. So every spring, we actually release an RFP or an RFQ for what we call our Technical Assistance Provider Registry. So if you want to send me a note after this, I can add you to our list to make sure you get that RFP when we release it later this year. But essentially, we vet different professional groups around the country on their experience with green building concepts as well as the affordable housing sector, and then you'll be on our list. So when groups are looking for professionals, that's where we direct them. So happy to follow up with you later on that. Great.
Okay, great. Thanks, Krista.
Is that it? Okay, sounds good. All right, so that's it for conduct. Now we're going to dive into the 8 different categories, and I'm just going to have enough time to give a high-level overview of some of the highlights of each of them, but I really encourage you all to go to our website, download the manual, find out more information there. So we're going to start at the beginning with integrative design. So actually on this slide are the names of all of the criterion that are in this category. So it's a fairly small category, but as I can't emphasize enough, it's really, really critical. A successful integrative design process really facilitates the development team's achievement of their objectives throughout the whole project lifecycle, right? The more robust and excellent your design process is, the fewer change orders you'll have and the less your project will cost. So this is a really critical time for us, and you'll see that these 7 different criterion touch on concepts about collaborative planning, touch on energy performance, touch on resident health, and touch on resilience. And as you'll remember when I called out the biggest differences between our older and our current criterion, those relate to criterion 1.2, A and B, about resident health, and then 1.3, A and B, which is about resilience. The A version of each of those is mandatory, and the B version is the more robust version, which is optional and associated with a healthy number of optional points to incentivize use there. So I'm going to go ahead and just dive right into the next category, which is location and neighborhood fabric. So locating a project within an existing neighborhood and in close proximity to infrastructure, transportation, and services encourages more resource-efficient development of land, reduces development costs, conserves energy, and adds vitality to the overall community. So within this section, we have a number of different items. They touch on areas ranging from sensitive site development, access to transportation for new construction projects, improving connectivity between the residents and other community amenities. And then we have optional measures regarding incentivizing locations of projects with easy access to fresh and local foods, local economic development opportunities, and community wealth creation through local hiring practices. So, for instance, here's just an image of an area in Michigan which has an asset map of the community. So really calling out what are the opportunities available near the project site that your residents might have access to. You can take an inventory of what's in your neighborhood, from stores to restaurants to farm stands to groceries to healthcare centers to banks, et cetera, and really wanting to make sure that we're aware of and conscious when we're selecting a site about how well residents will be able to connect with opportunity for a full life. And then on this next slide here, just representation of some of the various amenities to consider during the site selection and design process. With infrastructure, we have bike lanes at the bottom, we have community play spaces and activity spaces at the top, as well as infrastructure and transportation. So I'm just really flying through these sections to give you a flavor of what's included in each. We're going to go ahead and move to the next one here, which is site improvements. And this is after you've selected a site. What can you do to it to improve the environmental quality? So low-impact design and development principles minimize the site's environmental footprint and lower infrastructure costs associated with stormwater management, for instance. Some of the practices included here you'll be very familiar with, like our erosion and sedimentation control practices are really becoming just commonplace across any type of construction these days. But we have other measures in here which go above and beyond the norm. If we look at this next slide, we have a couple of different examples of addressing stormwater management. We have some curb cuts for rain gardens. We have a cistern in the middle. We have permeable pavers on the end. These are all just different examples of how some of our different criterion can be achieved with this information. And then on this next slide, I just have different examples about landscaping choices and considerations, making sure that when you're designing your landscape, you're taking care to ensure that it's not going to require more irrigation or rain or water than what actually is delivered to the site, right? So if you do have an irrigation system on the property, that's fine, but we have certain guidelines around the efficiency of that system that need to be followed. And, you know, these different decisions that you're making here in this respect will definitely vary depending on your climate. So that's category 3. I'm going to slide right into the next one. So this is category 4, water conservation. It's actually one of our smaller categories in the program, but I think it's really, really critical. You know, water conservation translates into direct utility savings and conserves a really precious national resource. So just wanted to share with you some information about how we use water in the United States. The last national study, the last national definitive study about how people use water in single-family homes by end use was completed in 1999. It was sponsored by the American Water Works Association Research Foundation. And what you see on the screen here is the pie chart breakdown of how we use water in the home. And you'll see that toilets come out on top, with clothes washers close behind, showers and the faucets, and then leaks coming in right behind that. So when this study was released in 1999, they found that on average, single-family homes in the United States are using 69 gallons per person per day. This study was recently recommissioned, and so it was completed over the past couple of years. The results are going to be published any day now. I'm looking forward to getting my hands on them, but I got a sneak preview of what the results of the new study show. And in sum, it's showing that on average today, people are using 41 gallons per person on average and have the potential, if they're using all the efficient fixtures, to use just 31 gallons per person per day. And I think this is really amazing, you know, how we've really decreased consumption from 69 to 41 just in a few years. And, you know, I think this has most to do with new regulations and standards based on toilet and clothes washer efficiency. So just really want to bring home the point that what you're speccing in your projects as to what's going to be used is going to have a dramatic and direct relation to reducing water demand. So we have different guidelines around specs and fixtures. And we also address leaks and water metering in our program as well. So what you see on the screen now are two different graphs of water consumption in two fairly identical properties. that were the same location, had same resident population in them, but you see that their graph of how much water that they were using each hour was very different. And without knowing much more about the properties, just by looking at these two graphs, you can tell that the property represented on the left is using a lot more water. It has a very high baseline, and you can identify immediately that this property has leaks, right? So this is measuring water consumption is something that we are promoting through our program in order to help reduce the amount of water that is used according to leaks in the program. And then this is just a shot that represents all of the different components of your outdoor landscaping, for instance, that could be or could not be driving up your water demand. So we have different measures in the program in regards to landscaping and irrigation. So to wrap this section up, here are the different criteria in the water conservation category, from fixtures to leaks and water metering to efficient plumbing layout design, water reuse, and access to potable water during emergencies is one of our newer optional measures related to resilience. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next category, which is energy efficiency, which is in some ways the core of our program, because as we all know, improvements in building energy performance result in utility cost savings, which improves and can improve residents' comfort, lower operating costs, and provide environmental benefit. I'm sure many of you are familiar and have the same philosophy as we do. What we really emphasize is the foundational concept of our philosophy in approaching energy usage is to build our buildings in such a way that they don't require much energy to operate at all. So let's make shell and envelope improvements to reduce the demand of energy of the building at large. And then let's think about the things that are going into our building, make sure that they're efficient. And only after we've done that, start thinking about renewables and the sources of energy that we're using. So the core part of this program is really this foundation part, the envelope improvements and reducing energy usage as a whole. We have, we addressed this in our criterion 5.1, the building performance standard. And we have 4 different iterations in A, B, C, and D, and you pick the one that you belong to depending on if you're new construction or an existing building, and whether or not you're low-rise or single-family, or whether or not you're mid-rise or high-rise. So essentially, if you're a new construction, we ask you to follow the Energy Star program. If you're an existing building, we ask you to do models and determine how your building stacks up according to that model. If you're a low-rise or single-family, you'll be doing HERS modeling, and you need to best in HERS 85. If you are mid-rise or high-rise in an existing building, we ask you to exceed ASHRAE 90.1. So this is the place of our program where we really have a program within a program. We're asking you to certify the Energy Star, for instance, and this is where you must partner with a HERS rater or an energy professional to help you through this process. And we do follow and recognize the ResNet sampling protocols for all 4 of these different iterations of the program if you do have a project with multiple units and you want to go there. So that's whole building energy efficiency. Then, of course, we have different standards for lights and appliances and right sizing of heating and cooling equipment to wrap up that section. We move on into category 6. This is materials. We have many of the things that you're most familiar with for green building programs with the low VOC paints and primers, environmentally preferable flooring, so essentially disincentivizing carpets. We have some new measures about asthmagen-free materials, and within this section also is where we touch on construction waste management as well as recycling. So thinking about the whole life cycle of materials as they're involved in the building. I'm going to go ahead and move into category 7, our next to the last category in the program. Healthy living environments has been a key focus of our program since the very beginning. And we approach health through our criteria from design through construction to operations as well. And in this most recent update to our program, we partnered really closely with the American Heart Association Pew's Health Impact Project and the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene to really ramp up our focus on health and the criterion. So I'm going to walk you through a couple of the different ways that we do this, starting with different environmental factors that a project may address that many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with, such as radon and lead. Both are very hazardous in certain projects, but can be dealt with in an appropriate way so that we can ensure that future residents won't be negatively impacted. Then we can move on to how a home is designed and how this really can affect the health of the residents in the building. For instance, research has shown that improving access to places for physical activity can result in a 25% increase in the number of people who exercise at least 3 times a week. So for instance, including play spaces like this in a project, improving access to places like this can increase the physical health of our residents. We all know that physical inactivity increases the risk of many chronic diseases and conditions including obesity, hypertension, heart disease, stroke, some cancers, diabetes. So ensuring that pedestrian and cycling infrastructure, for instance, is included in a project can improve health by significantly increasing daily physical activity. So this is health as it regards to how a home is designed. Then we can go into the building, still thinking about health and design. One of the best ways to really grapple with this is thinking about active design and thinking about stairwells in multifamily buildings. At this New York City project that you see pictured here, the stairwell was daylit and the elevator was tucked behind the stairwell. So residents encountered the stairs as a first option for getting to their apartments and were compelled to take it rather than the elevator. Research has shown that 2 minutes of stair climbing daily burns enough calories to prevent annual average weight gain. And common stairs also promote social interaction and improve mental health. And there's also been research that has shown that climbing 3 to 5 floors of stairs per week is associated with a reduced stroke risk of 29%. So some serious health benefits here that are associated with simple design aspects that you can work into your project as appropriate. Of course, for residents for whom mobility in stairs is not possible, there are other design features that can either increase the frequency or the duration of physical activity that we encourage. So moving on, still thinking about health and design, but moving from outside the building to common spaces to now inside the unit, the dwelling unit itself. We're all familiar with the ADA regulations. They emerged mid-century and really focused on wheelchair accessibility. In our program, we go above and beyond ADA to really think about universal design, really encouraging our project teams to anticipate and plan for a diversity of residents' abilities and needs as it relates to living in their homes and creating structures so that they need not be modified to enable these people to have full lives in their homes. And if we now move away from thinking about health in regards to design, but think more about it in regards to different construction practices. I show here just a schematic of a ventilation system. All of our projects, the new construction and substantial rehab projects, are required to comply with ASHRAE 62.2. And if they have common spaces, comply with 62.1 for those corridors and stairwells, because ventilation is critical and impacts indoor air quality and health of residents. In our program, we also have guidance regarding combustion safety, appropriate venting of dryers, and different construction strategies that reduce moisture intrusion. So a number of different things that affect health. So we've talked about health as it regards to environmental factors and then design practices and now construction practices. But now we can get to health as it relates to how a building is maintained. And we really call this out in regards to green cleaning practices and integrative pest management. So there are simple opportunities that are cost-effective and promote a healthier living environment in terms of these that we promote through the program. So to cap this category off, here's some highlights of different criteria in this section. It's one of our largest sections, but it's one of the items which we think is really, really critical. So moving on down to category 8, which is the last category, which is operations, maintenance, resident engagement. Educational materials and orientations help educate residents and staff on green features that were designed to deliver health, economic, and environmental benefits, as well as residents' role and staff's role in realizing those benefits in their own lives. So all the measures in this category, and all of them, the titles of them are listed on the slide, were written to encourage more effective manuals and plans for green operations. And then criterion 8.5 and 8.6 is about data collection, that energy and water performance data collection that I mentioned in the very beginning. So these were structured to build awareness of property performance by property owners and managers, so making that property performance data more actionable by the people who are running the buildings. So that wraps it up for those 8 categories. Quick tour through all of those, but you see them recapped here again. So integrative design, location neighborhood fabric, site improvements, water conservation, energy efficiency, materials, healthy living environment, and then O&M and resident engagement. And remember that the synergies between all of these are really, really critical. So on this next slide, I just wanted to give you an idea of our certification process. So if you've decided to pursue certification, you would go through the criteria, ensure that you're meeting all the measures that you need to, and then when you're ready, you'll come to us and submit what we call your pre-build application. It must be submitted at least 30 days before construction start, and you'll give us certain information. You'll give us an overview of the project, some basic logistical details. You'll let us know about your intended methods for complying with our criterion, and then you'll upload a number of different things. So you'll upload a site plan, a context map, an energy modeling form. You'll upload outlines for those manuals that we mentioned in Category 8, so resident engagement and operations and maintenance, because we want to make sure you're thinking about it in the beginning so that by the end it's not just something that's left to the end. You're actually thinking about it as you're putting the building together. And then there will be other supplemental documents as necessary depending on which optional criterion you select. So some of our criterion do not require supplemental docs, others do. So if you go to our website, there's a document there that you can find that has supplemental document instructions, and you can find out detailed information there. So assuming you submit that through our website, we'll review it, and we'll get back to you in no more than 30 days. And we'll either let you know if specific things need to be adjusted on your application or if you're approved. And then after the pre-build stage is successful, you'll go on and you'll build your project, and you'll work with your energy professional throughout the project to make sure that all of those measures are successful. You're getting the Energy Star certification if you're new construction, et cetera. And then we'll see you again at post-build. So we ask that within 60 days of getting your CO that you come back to our portal, you open up that application you started when you started the project, and you update the information. You know, you let us know what may have changed. You give us other supplemental documents that are relevant at the finish of a project and that weren't available at the beginning. And you give us access to the utility tracking mechanism that you're using. So, and again, we'll review this within 30 days. We'll get back to you. Assuming everything works out, we'll let you know that you're certified, and we'll give you access to order a plaque. You can get 1 plaque at no charge for each project, and then you're certified. So that walks you through the certification process. This next page, again, I have our website address at the very top, but instead of clicking on criteria and certification once you go to this page, if you click on resources and tools, you'll find all of these links and headings there. So as you can see, we have a lot of information on the site to help you be more successful. Everything from robust templates for resident engagement manuals to we actually translated our criterion into the master spec format, so you can pull down those specs in master spec and cut and paste and customize whatever you'd like to give to your trades, put in your RFPs, et cetera. We have a whole lot of information here, also information about the cost-benefit analyses of the program. So encourage you to check that out. And if there's a resource that you were expecting to see there that you think would be really useful, but you don't see it there, just shoot us an email, and we'll see what we can do about developing that information. So this is the final slide. If you'd like more information about the program, if you'd like to be on our list for the distribution for our Technical Assistance Provider Registry, if you have any questions, this is the email address to use, certification@enterprisecommunity.org. Our team is checking that multiple times a day, no matter who's on vacation or sick, et cetera. So this is the best place to get your questions answered. So I think that's it for me today. I'm happy to answer questions. And just to recap, we started with the context of the criticality of bringing the benefits of green building to the affordable housing sector. We talked about how enterprise, who's traditionally been in the affordable housing space, came into the sustainability space. And then we went through the 8 categories of the criteria, and then I wrapped up with a quick overview of our certification process. So I think that's it. Happy to answer any questions.
Well, thank you, Krista. This has been great. Thank you for your time. And we got several questions coming in. I've got a few questions piling up for those of you here live. Please put more questions in. We've definitely got some time here to go over. And I think I'm glad this one just popped up, and I think it's probably on a lot of folks' minds. And I'm not sure specifically which version of the program they're talking about, but just maybe broadly, because this could probably be a whole nother session in itself. How does the Enterprise Green Communities program differ from LEED practices?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have a really great relationship with USGBC, and we collaborate on a regular basis. There are some standards between our programs that are the same, and when that is the case, we make sure that, whenever we're answering questions about that particular criterion or credit, that we're answering them in the same way so that we can try to eliminate confusion. But there are differences between the program. The biggest basic one is that ours is specifically for affordable housing, and LEED, of course, addresses all sorts of different building types. So we're really focused in on this end user group. And most of the projects that come through our certification pipeline are doing so because they're getting, because oftentimes groups that offer financing for affordable housing will ask those projects that they fund to follow our program. So we're really tied into the affordable housing finance, development, construction, development process. So that's our core focus. But bigger picture-wise, both LEED and Green Communities are holistic green building programs. We cover many of the same categories. We talk about site, we talk about energy and water and materials and health. We have combustion safety and ventilation. There are lots of different similarities. I think our program has a bigger focus on health. Our newer resilience and health criterion that are in our Integrative Design section are actually, there are similar counterparts now in LEED for pilot credits that address that, but ours are actually mandatory in our program. And then, let's see. I was going to say something else, and it slipped my mind. I'll come back to it if I think of it later. But in general, we're both holistic programs, but our program has more mandatory criterion and fewer options for optional points. So if you're pursuing our criterion, many of the items are kind of spelled out for you that you have to comply with and incorporate into your project. You do certainly still have a lot of choice about optional criterion, but ours is a little bit more prescriptive in that way as compared to LEED.
And also, wouldn't it be true that, it seems like LEED follows this certified silver, gold, platinum, and Enterprise doesn't have anything, like you just have points, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. With Green Communities, you're either certified or you're not. With LEED, you do have those different tiers of certification. Mm-hmm.
One thing that I had found pretty interesting was after you released 2015 and put in that resiliency piece. Sure enough, not too soon on the pilot credits, USGBC had released a resiliency, and I thought that was pretty cool because it's great to see that green building programs are heading towards utilizing resiliency strategies as climate change becomes a reality.
Yeah, and actually many of the people who worked with us to develop our resilience measures worked with LEED to develop their pilot credits. Alex Wilson was kind of at the hub of that for both of us, and a lot of other really great people. So yeah, that's an exciting new direction for all of us.
So on building ventilation in health, and I kind of want to expand upon this question here from Casey, ASHRAE 62.1 and 62.2. First, the question is, what year do you use for that? And I believe, is that 2007 you reference in the program?
It's actually 2010. Yeah, 2010
okay.
For both 62.2 and 62.1. Yeah.
Yeah. So how can you just speak to how is that a little bit different? We bump into design teams, mechanical teams who are kind of coming from the commercial sector, designing some buildings, never heard of ASHRAE 62.2, and sometimes they're saying, well, isn't ventilating a building just opening a window?
Right. Yeah. So the goal of requiring some kind of mechanical ventilation through 62.1 and 62.2 is to make sure that even if there's a unit where no one ever opens a window, that there will still be ventilation. We all know that there are different pressures acting inside and outside of our buildings all the time, and that there will be some air exchange. It will be more if you have a leakier building, it'll be less if you have a tighter building. So what the intent of requiring ASHRAE 62.2 and 62.1 is to really control that flow and make sure that we're at least getting a certain amount that the ASHRAE committees have decided is an appropriate amount at certain times and from certain sources, ideally, so that we're not just relying on someone to remember to open a window or not. I'm actually in New York today, but when I left my house in D.C. this morning, it was 7 degrees. I can guarantee you I am not opening my windows today. So how can we ensure that regardless of the outdoor conditions, whether it be temperature or smell or whatever it is, let's not rely on just people to act in a certain way. Let's build in certain components in the mechanical system to ensure that we're going to have a better quality of air.
Great, thanks. What tools do you encourage project managers to use that help fit budget constraints and keep the housing still affordable?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think this almost comes down to a project team by project team answer, right? I think it really comes down to what I was trying to emphasize about those synergies in the decision making. Every decision that you make when you're designing or developing a project is going to have certain upfront costs and certain operating cost implications, right? So I think really taking the time to consider what the decisions you're making are upfront and how they relate to one another is critical, as well as how they relate to later operating decisions is really critical. For instance, there are certain criteria in our program that you can follow, and by installing a certain system, you're going to be well on your way to complying with another criterion in the program, right? Just by selecting a different kind of system maybe than you had initially thought. One example maybe that I can think of is to meet our energy efficiency requirements, you need to think about insulation, right? And have a certain R value to ensure that your building's going to be well insulated and efficient. At the same time you're thinking about that insulation, though, you might want to be thinking about the health qualities and the pathogen-free considerations of bumping it up. So I think just a really thorough tracking of the decisions that you're making and how they're going to impact one another is really critical. I know there are lots of different project management tools and different development tools that are out there. I think all of them can be used for good, but I really think it's just that attention to detail which is so critical that we're really asking projects to do in a way that maybe they don't do on a normal basis. That makes a difference.
Thanks, Krista. You got time for a few more questions?
Yeah, sure thing.
Great. So in the beginning, you had mentioned there was a lot of funding for pilot projects. I do recall in the past there was some funding for design charrettes from the foundation or from Enterprise. But now, I believe most of the incentives are coming from the LIHTC or low-income housing tax credits. Would you say most states incentivize the Green Communities program through that in some way?
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. We did a survey of all the states about this time last year to find out in the LIHTC realm what different states were using as part of their QAPs. You know, for the people who aren't familiar with this end of the world, you know, the housing finance world, the funding to develop affordable housing is very limited, especially compared to demand. So there are all sorts of things that housing finance agencies use to determine like which projects will get the funding and which ones won't. And most HFAs now do, well, all HFAs now do include something about Energy Star appliances, and most of them talk about lighting and water fixtures. I think about 80% of them require a whole building green building program. So it might be Enterprise Green Communities, it might be LEED, it might be a local program like Earthcraft or Greenpoint Rated. But there are 23 different states in the country that do require compliance with Enterprise Green Communities to get that funding. So yeah, we see a lot of action that way.
Any other incentives or funding that you know of? I know some states reduce permitting fees for green building programs. Some do tax abatements. Anything else that sticks out, or I'm assuming there's nothing federally?
There's nothing federal right now. I guess the other thing I'd add to your list is, if you remember, for the new construction projects at least, that Energy Star is a component of our program, you might look for different utility incentives that are addressed, you know, focused on Energy Star, and use that as kind of the stepping stone to this kind of program. Yeah.
There was a question about, and I don't want to get into it too much here, on the New York City schedule of fees. Is that something someone can email and get from you all or see on your website?
Yeah, it's on our website. For pre-build, we charge $12.50. For post-build, we charge $300, and that's what it is. So there's that pre-build fee and that post-build fee, just for New York City projects.
You know, some other questions that we get about the program, is this a program where you can build new construction and certify in rural areas or on green space, or does it have to be more urban and infill and you know, existing building or existing lots?
Yeah, you can certainly follow the program in rural locations. We recognize that there are different constraints and realities depending on if you're in an urban location or in a rural location. So we have slightly different guidelines around, for instance, density and around transportation, and even around different ways to address construction waste management depending on like what area you're in. But we do recognize that housing and affordable housing is being built in rural areas. You know, it's being built in other locations than just infill lots in urban areas. So we do want to be able to address those programs and those projects and help them build in a more holistically green way. So while I can't say that any project built on any site could certify, we do have specific guidelines for rural projects and for projects in tribal areas too. So that's
can you tell me a little bit more about I believe the updates you've made for low-rise, I believe moderate or substantial rehabs of masonry buildings?
let's see, are you talking about the energy requirements there?
Yeah, I think you've scaled down the HERS index requirements there, from what I understand.
Yeah. So if you remember the whole building energy requirements, we have different pathways depending on if you're new construction or existing, whether or not you're low-rise or high-rise. For those existing buildings that are low-rise or single-family, the requirement is that you get a HERS 85 or better. We have another option in that category now, where if you have a building of a certain age, which has a certain kind of envelope that really does not permit you to add insulation, we allow you to get a HERS 100 or better. So there are more details in the criterion, but that's written right into 5.1 now. That's right.
Great. And we're going to get wrapping up here. The last question I have is sort of on the third-party qualification and assurance aspect, which I guess could speak to a little bit some of the differences of LEED. You know, as I understand it, having a HERS index rating, especially, or Energy Star 3 rating, you know, does require a certain component of quality assurance. But beyond that, you know, is there anybody else who is inspecting or assessing, you know, on-site any of the other components of the building, or is there any plan to have that in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's true that at pre-build and post-build, our reviews are really remote. We do rely heavily on that energy professional who's helping the projects achieve those criterion, because we've seen through our evaluation work of the program that before we had the requirement to certify to Energy Star or to actually get that HERS index and work with the rater, that was the area of that projects in our program were complying with or had the most problems complying with. So it's really critical that we have that built into the program. And the other aspect of our program that we do have in relation to on-site work is we have what we call a verification protocol, where we randomly select 10% of the projects that come through each year, and we hire and pay for a green building professional to come out on site and to do a desktop review, and then to come out mid-construction, when the walls are still open, to verify all the measures, and then post-construction as well to do performance testing and verify all the measures. So that threat, if you will, of verification is on the table, but to keep costs down, we don't do that for every single project.
Well, great, Krista. Can you just, again, remind everybody where they can go to get more information or ask any further questions?
Yeah, so for questions, email the address you see on the screen, certification@enterprisecommunity.org. And for our website, you can go to enterprisecommunity.org/green.
Okay, perfect. Well, thanks for everyone for joining us. Krista, I want to thank you for your time today. We're going to sign off now, and hope everybody has a good rest of the week. Thank you.
Thank you.